Hello, welcome back to St Michael's Hill. Today's video is part 5 of the Lima Class 33 detailing project. Parts 1 to 4 were all kind of released last year. In fact, part 4 was the end of October, so there's been quite a wait, and apologies for that. With the move coming up, a few things got kind of packed away, and this was unfortunately one of them. Those of you who were watching the series before will have noticed that there is already a little bit of difference on what is here to what was left before. And basically that comes down to a bit of detailing on the buffer beam and also some painting on the buffer beam. I actually did film this. I'm going to, in a second, show you that footage and how it got there, but it was quite a while ago now. Once that's done and you're brought right up to date on where the model is today, I'm just going to finish it off with a bit of a painting and weathering to get it to a position where it can be called finished. So I'm going to pass you back to myself back in probably October, November time, and I'll leave previous me to tell you how we got to this stage, and then I will be right back with you. So today I'm going to get the buffer beam done. I'll give it a quick coat of paint just to take away the grey plastic look, and then add some buffer beam detailing parts from Helgen's spare sprue, and I'll add a coupling, a cosmetic one, just to have it looking right. And then from there I will just weather up the locomotive, so give it a quick pass with an airbrush, and we'll go from there. So first of all, I'm going to use this Rail Match 412 weathered black paint, just to paint up these buffer beams, just to blacken them down. I've looked at the pictures of the prototype and it very much was a black buffer beam, so I'm going to do that, and then I will get back to you. So there we go. I've painted both buffer beams in weathered black, so they'll now look a lot better once the detail's added and the weathering's applied. So the next job is to detail up the buffer beam. I've got this Helgen sprue here from their Class 33, which gives me sort of the pipes that will fit directly into the buffer beams that I put on. The other thing I've got is the Smith's 3-link couplings, which are going to be put onto both ends, just to give a prototypical looking coupling. So I'm going to put these in place now. The buffer beam parts are quite simple. They'll just slot into the gaps that are on the buffer beam, and these 3-link couplings are fairly easy to put together. I will show you how that's done. We will probably need to drill a little hole into the buffer beam to enlarge what's already there, but we'll have a look at that when we get to it. The Smith's coupling is made up of these parts. So here we have the 3 links. Now they come as separate individual links that I've already put together. There's the hook here, and then a spring and a clasp, a clamp that goes into the small hole at the end of the coupling. So in theory, this bar goes through the buffer beam, which we then attach a spring onto the back of and then fix it in place with a clamp. And then these links obviously hang from the small hole behind the hook. So that's how, in theory, it should work. However, I'm going to need to check on how that will fit with the body shell and coming off. So I've already enlarged the hole on the buffer beam slightly, so as you can see there, it will fit through now. So I will place it through and then I'll see how it's going to fit on the locomotive once the body is back on the chassis. So I've placed the hook through, and as you can see, the bar actually comes quite a long way through the, there we go, that's a better shot. So the bar comes quite a long way through the buffer beam. Now I'm a little bit worried that it's going to interfere somehow with this, the chassis here, or even the bogie itself. So I'm just going to place it on and see if A, it'll go on, and then B, if it's going to interfere with anything. So I'm going to have to place the body on at quite an angle to be able to hook underneath the chassis, which does look like it fits. So I'll clip on the body and then we'll see where we are. So the body is now back onto the chassis, and I think, as you can see, there is just about enough clearance on this hook, but when we move the bogie a little bit, as you can probably hear, there's just a little scratching on the bogie. So I'm going to have to look at maybe shortening this clip and fixing it into a different way. So I might just cut off most of this bar and then just super glue it into place. So that's what I'm going to do. I've now trimmed the coupling hook back just by using a pair of wire cutters. It seems to have worked fairly well, so now I should be able to get that in place and add the chain on. Now, as we're not going to be using the spring or the clamp, I can just put those to one side. I'll keep hold of them because they're always useful things to have. So I've now put the coupling unit together. It is a little bit tricky, but I think it looks good. I think it'll look good on the loco. One thing to be said, I'm going to be using these as a cosmetic coupling, but they are, by all intents and purposes, working couplings, especially if you hook them up properly with the spring and the clamp. So whilst I don't have a proper coupling on the front of this loco now, if I was to attach a similar coupling to a rolling stock of any kind, I would be able to use it. Yeah, for this, I generally see it as being quite a cosmetic thing. So now it's time to just place that onto the front of the logo, and then I can start adding the pipe work. So the coupling's now in place. Just use a little bit of super glue on the back of it to keep it in place, and I'm really happy with how that's come out. Just time to add some of the buffer beam detailing parts and add the buffers back on. So there we go, we're back up to date. Let me talk to you a little bit about what still needs to be done. The first thing is this central window here needs to be blacked out and have a destination, or an old destination blind or something put in there. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do that yet. That's one thing that I am a little bit puzzled about. But there are various options. I think the first thing to do would be just to paint that the flush glazing there black, and maybe even add the white on top of it at this stage. However, it's not a massive problem. There are various ways around that. And then I'm just going to look to give the model a bit of a weathering. I'm going to give it a kind of probably a mid-level weathering. The aim would be to kind of cover up a little bit of Lima's lack of detailing with some grime and all that sort of stuff. So I'll be looking to kind of give the underframe a kind of good amount of colours from kind of the track dirt range, all that sort of stuff. And then I'm probably going to apply a few washes and then maybe some weathering powders to the body to try and get a kind of used look. This loco in service was a fairly kind of recently painted into this livery towards the end of the period that I model. However, it's probably going to look a little bit better if it has a slightly kind of higher weathering. I don't want it to look kind of X-Works or anything like that. So it will be given a good kind of weathering as if it had been towards the end of its tour it did. The roof is a very light colour, so it probably would have shown a lot of the kind of roof dirt and all that sort of stuff up quite quickly. And again, the livery just generally is fairly kind of light all round, so I'm going to give it a good weathering, and hopefully we'll be calling the project finished. So I've added a first wash of a black acrylic paint and water mix. It's very rough. I will take a lot of this off. It's just a case of getting it on there, and then hopefully it stays in kind of in the nooks and crannies around the grills and around the kind of etched plates and things like that. So it does look a bit of a mess right now, but the next stage after it's dried a little bit is just to take most of it back off. The thing with weathering is it's as much about removing paint as it is applying it. So it's always about putting it on and then removing it, and that gives you kind of the kind of age-old kind of look. You have to imagine these locomotives and what we're trying to achieve when weathering is really an accumulation of dirt over years. Now, these locos were washed, however, occasionally. So you have to imagine that they get dirty, things get taken off, but that a lot of the grime gets left in places where it's just difficult to wash. These locos probably weren't, taken back to pristine unless they went into the works and kind of needed that ex-works look for whatever reason. So kind of, if we can see here, kind of in these grills and things like that, it was always going to be difficult to kind of get all the mud and grime out of them. So it's nice to just have some of these kind of picked out, and that'll probably stay. Whereas the body sides were generally kept fairly clean, other than kind of spills from grills and things like that. So generally this loco will be clean, but not pristine, and that's what I'll be going for. So to get this off, I'm just going to use a little bit of toilet roll or kitchen roll or anything like that. Anything that's going to bring off the paint that you don't want. Just kind of use kind of streaking motions and remove as much as possible. So there we go. After removing a lot of that, you can see what's left behind. It's a fairly clean loco, but just with some kind of characteristic kind of streaking. The doors are a little bit more defined, as are the grills and things like that. So it's just about kind of removing a fair bit of this, but not all of it. And I will use an airbrush to kind of tone it down a little bit as well, and especially down at the bottom here. We'll use the airbrush for the bogies and the underframe and all that sort of stuff, because that needs to be a lot more kind of a lot more grimy, a lot more track dirt kind of colour. So that's probably going to be the next thing I do, actually, is to mix up some sleeper grime and things, and basically give it a quick pass with the airbrush to get it looking right. So I've now masked the model up, basically to protect the glazing and generally the upper portion of the side here. I'm basically literally going to go for kind of some underframe weathering now, but a little bit of overspray onto the body side would be fine. I didn't want to mask it off completely just because it wouldn't look natural if there was some overspray that kind of suddenly ended in a straight line. So I've done that. So next time you'll see me down in my makeshift spray booth. Now, it should always be said when you're doing any sort of spraying, especially with enamels, make sure you do it in a well ventilated area, wear a mask if possible. I generally do mine outside to kind of ensure that that is always the case, and I'm not going to be breathing in too many harmful fumes. So yeah, just make sure that when you're doing any spraying, especially with enamels, it's always in a well ventilated area, ideally outside or in a proper spray booth. So there we go. I've now weathered up the underframe and the bogies. Let's see if I can just kind of get it into a slightly better light. So there you go. Gone is the kind of black plasticky look. It's been replaced by something that's a lot more kind of realistic. Having a look at kind of the wash that we did before, there's a few areas that I'm not madly happy with. So just here is kind of a bit too much there, and a little bit on the front is a little bit too obvious. So I'm just going to take that back a little bit. Even now after it's dried, a kind of cotton bud or something will clear that up quite nicely. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to add a little bit of weathering powder on the roof and to some of these kind of vents, just to kind of darken those up a little bit. But other than that, I'm kind of getting to a point where I'm quite happy with it. Like I said, I don't want to go overboard. I want it to look like a fairly clean loco, just that's had, you know, some use to it. So I'm going to do that now, yeah, I'll show you what the results are. So there we go. I've stripped that kind of back a little bit, so it's just a lot more subtle now. It looked a little bit obvious before, and I've kind of gone over a few areas and just kind of tried to peel it back a little bit, but kept some of the streaks on it, and some of them come down the side as well. So I'm quite happy with how that's looking now. So I'm going to get on to the weathering powders. So the powder I'm going to be using is this. So it's MIG Rocket Exhaust. Should give kind of a fairly good dark exhaust kind of look for some of the grills. So yeah, that's what I'm going to go for now. So with this, first thing I'm going to do is apply a little bit of matte coat varnish to a few of the areas that I really want to kind of highlight and keep the powders there. So just with a brush, just a simple case of maybe around this grill or the fan here, and then in these grills here. And this is just going to provide something for the weathering powders to kind of adhere to. I'm basically just using this old brush. It's long past its best for painting, but for something like this it should work quite well. Like I said, so get a bit of the quite a dark powder, so I'm going to kind of take it easy to start with. Add it to these grates and grills. You can see where it mixes with the matte coat, it's kind of activating the powder.
For now, I'm not going to try and go anywhere with the kind of matte coat. Same on this side, really.
So I did decide to go a little bit heavier on the weathering in the end, partly down to a few reasons. One, I kind of like things that look a little bit kind of dirtier. The period I model is famous for, you know, generally not being good for upkeep. The other thing was, during the process, I was using some thinners to take off some of the weathering that was on the loco, which is something I often do. However, the Lima paint is very thin, and actually some of the it was kind of down here, some of the yellow started to kind of show through the black, so I just kind of decided to go for a slightly heavier weathering to cover that up partly, but also I just, like I said, it probably looks quite nice for it. But yeah, generally very happy with kind of how it's looking. It's pretty nice result. This turbot wagon behind has also been given a very light weathering. I will give this a lot heavier weathering actually, because it's going to be a fairly old wagon for the time, so I'm probably going to look to use some white washes to weather that down, and then add some rust effect from the wagons video I did last time on the inside there, so that's going to look very different by the time you see it running on the layout. So I think that's going to be it for this series. There is one thing I do need to do for sure, which is add the blind into the central window just here. It is something I've got to do. There's a website I need to check out to get a version of it and get it ready in there, but I think for now I'm just going to leave it at this. I will look also at some point to add the windscreen wipers. They're quite distinctive on the Class 33, and I think it does look like it's missing something without them. There is more that I could potentially do, and maybe I will do in the future. For example, I add lights. I could do the CD motor conversion that I was looking at last week with the Lima Class 37, and I could also probably replace some of these rails with wire, and even kind of add some etched kind of brass on to the grills and things like that. But I think for now this is probably where I want to leave the project. I'm quite happy with where it is now, what it used to look like. I'm going to try, if I can, to find a picture of it before and after. So if I can, I will put that on the screen in just a second. I'm not actually going to be able to show it running on St Michael's Hill, which is slightly disappointing, but due to the move it's not quite ready yet. Thank you very much for joining me on St Michael's Hill, and I will see you all again soon. Cheers, bye bye.